Why was the smallest person stepping off that helicopter the one who made the biggest men fall silent? The Chinook's rotors turned up a storm of dust and diesel fumes as it dropped onto the forward operating base's crude landing pad. The air was thick with grit. Soldiers squinted against the stinging wind, some shielding their faces, others simply watching the new arrivals with that casual, predatory curiosity that spreads in places like this. Through the swirling haze, a single figure emerged from the belly of the aircraft. She was barely visible at first, almost lost beneath an oversized rucksack and layers of tactical gear that seemed to swallow her whole. She moved like someone who carried weight every day, but her frame made it look absurd. 5'2", maybe 115 pounds in full kit. Staff Sergeant Maya Chin stepped onto Afghan soil without a word. She looked less like a soldier and more like someone's little sister who'd wandered into the wrong war. Her ACS hung loose on her frame. Her Kevlar helmet sat awkwardly on her head, casting shadows across sharp, unreadable features. Jesus Christ. They're sending us children now, muttered Sergeant First Class Marcus Tank Morrison. The nickname fit. He was built like an armored vehicle and twice as subtle. Beside him, a knot of infantry soldiers near the motor pool chuckled like hyenas spotting an easy target. Private Danny Williams, 19 years old, 6 months in country, already talking like a veteran, didn't even try to lower his voice. I bet she can't even lift her own pack without help. What's she gonna do if we get hit? Hide. Behind her rifle? The betting pool started right there. Tank peeled a crumpled 20 from his pocket. 3 days before she's crying to go home. Any takers? 3 days. Rodriguez, a corporal, shook his head. I say she doesn't make it through her first patrol. 20 says she asked for a transfer within 48 hours. They all laughed. Maya heard every word. Her hearing had always been exceptional, a gift or maybe a curse, but her face gave away nothing. No flinch, no glare. She kept walking, each movement deliberate, economical, as though she were rationing energy for something important. They didn't see what she was really doing while they laughed. She was scanning, cataloging every face, every weapon, every guard tower's line of sight, every blind spot in the perimeter. She logged escape routes without thinking, marked cover positions in her mind, calculated angles, distances, probabilities. She'd done it so many times that the process was muscle memory. As she passed the motor pool, her gaze brushed over Tank without hesitation. Her brain mapped the force needed to drop him, the points to strike, the seconds it would take. It wasn't malice, it was a reflex, the kind you only develop after years of surviving situations where hesitation got people killed. Hey, sweetheart, Tank called, his voice thick with condescension. Need help with that bag? Looks like it weighs more than you do. The men burst into fresh laughter. Maya paused just long enough for Tank to catch something in her eyes. Something cold, sharp, predatory, and then it was gone. Maybe he'd imagined it. I'm fine. Thank you, she said quietly. No edge, no sarcasm, just fact. She walked on behind her. Williams mimicked her voice with an exaggerated accent and earned more laughter. The comments got uglier, drifting into territory that soldiers in the middle of nowhere often slip toward when boredom and arrogance mix. In her quarters, Maya unpacked. With surgical precision, her gear wasn't strewn across the floor like the others. Every item had a place. Every weapon, every tool was cleaned, checked, and positioned exactly where her hand would reach for it in the dark. If anyone had been watching, they might have noticed her rifle, a custom-built M24, the kind you didn't get through standard issue. They might have noticed the tools in her kit, things that most grunts wouldn't even recognize. They might have asked why she carried certain toiletry items that weren't really for hygiene at all. But no one was watching. By the time the laughter outside had faded into the night, she had her rifle assembled, The scope adjusted, the bolt cycling smooth as silk. Through the glass, she found Tank's face in the distance and settled the crosshairs over his forehead. 89, she murmured. No one heard her. No one knew what the number meant. But for her, it was the sum of lives taken, each one a mission completed. The Predator was already inside Forward Operating Base Blackwater. She just hadn't shown her teeth. The next morning, the briefing room buzzed with pre-dawn tension. Captain Rodriguez stood at the front. A battered map spread across the table behind him. Maya sat in the back, almost invisible among the bulkier men, who seemed to have unconsciously formed a wall between her and the front. Increased insurgent activity in Sectors 7 and 9, Rodriguez said. 3 patrols today. Tank, you're taking Alpha. Team North, Williams. Bravo sweeps the market. Henderson. Charlie escorts the convoy to the village. Maya waited. Her eyes stayed on Rodriguez. Chun. Inventory duty. Supply sergeant needs counts on ammo and rations in the warehouse. The smirk on Tank's face was instant. Careful with those heavy boxes, Tinkerbell. Williams chimed in. We should get her one of those stepladders so she can reach the top shelves. The laughter was louder this time. Actually, sir, Maya said evenly, I'd prefer patrol duty. I'm qualified. You're qualified to follow orders. Rodriguez cut in. The real soldiers handle the dangerous work. Real soldiers. The words hit harder than she expected. Still, she just nodded. Yes, sir. She heard Tank mutter as they left. Thank God we don't have to babysit the mascot today. The morning in the warehouse was exactly what she'd expected. Hot, stale air and the endless counting of crates, while the supply sergeant barely acknowledged her. But even here, her mind wasn't on numbers. It was on the base's vulnerabilities, the choke points, the blind angles, the ways an enemy could bleed them dry in hours. By the afternoon, there was at least a glimmer of purpose. Combat drills, room clearing and mock buildings. This was something she could excel at. Though her partner made that nearly impossible, Williams smirked when they were paired. Try to keep up, sweetheart. And don't get in my way when the real work starts. The first room went fine. The second, not so much. He deliberately fed her wrong information about target positions. Trying to trip her up, she trusted her own eyes and instincts. But the hesitation cost them seconds. And he made sure everyone knew whose fault it supposedly was. It became a pattern, wrong directions, sabotage timing, public humiliation. The breaking point came during rifle maintenance training. Peterson, Williams called across the range. Maybe start with the basics. I don't think our little friend here knows which end the bullets come out of. More laughter. Maya's tone stayed level. Actually, I think your weapon hasn't been cleaned properly in weeks. That carbon build-up. I don't need some desk jockey telling me. The shove came out of nowhere. Hard. She went down, helmet skittering across the dirt. The crowd erupted in jeers. She lay there a moment, tasting dust, feeling the old heat of humiliation pressing in. And then she got up, dusted herself off, picked up her rifle, walked toward him. Would you like to make our next drill more interesting? He grinned, still riding the approval of the crowd. Bring it on, Tinkerbell. She smiled for the first time since arriving. It wasn't a pleasant smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Why was it always the loudest ones who underestimated the quietest? The interesting drill started the next morning. It wasn't part of the official schedule. Just something Williams had cooked up to humiliate her again. He told the others it would be hand-to-hand warm-ups before the formal training. He didn't mention he planned to make an example out of her. They squared off in the dirt outside the barracks. A loose ring of soldiers formed around them, the mood somewhere between amusement and anticipation. Williams stretched his shoulders like a man about to toss around a rag doll. Maya adjusted her stance with the economy of someone who'd been here before. You ready to go crying to supply after this? He asked. She didn't answer, just watched him. The instructor gave the signal. Williams lunged. going for a simple shove to knock her off balance again. It didn't happen. She caught his wrist mid-motion, shifted her weight, and used his own momentum to put him in the dirt so fast the crowd's laughter cut off mid-breath. She stepped back, giving him room to get up. He came at her harder, a wild swing this time. She ducked under it, trapped his arm, and twisted. Not enough to break it, but enough to make him grunt in pain and drop to one knee. 3 moves later, Williams was on his back, staring at the sky with a bleeding lip and a swelling eye. The circle around them had gone quiet except for a low whistle from someone in the back. "Your weapon maintenance," she said calmly, as if the entire exchange had been about cleaning rifles, "should always be as disciplined as your movements." The crowd didn't laugh this time. 2 days later, her name came up in a briefing for an entirely different reason. The room was filled with the usual early morning fatigue, mugs of bitter coffee steaming in the chill. Captain Rodriguez's tone cut through the haze. "Gentlemen, meet your new nightmare." He pointed to a grainy surveillance photo tacked to the board. A figure in desert camouflage, face hidden by a mask. Intelligence calls him the Ghost. No confirmed identity, no nationality, but his work speaks for itself. 23 confirmed kills in the last 8 months. Coalition soldiers, all single shots. All from distances our best snipers say shouldn't be possible. Maya's attention sharpened. She'd heard whispers about this man before, and in her world, whispers were usually worth more than official briefings. Rodriguez laid out the pattern of attacks. Impossible shots, psychological messages left at the scene. Ambush staged in places previously cleared. Tank raised his hand. "Sir, we've dealt with snipers before. What makes this one different?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "This one hunts us. Chooses the ground, controls the pace. Special forces have gone after him and come back empty-handed, or not at all." Williams, his face still marked from their warm-up, asked the question no one else wanted to. "So, what's the plan? Wait for him to come to us?" "Negative," Rodriguez said. "We believe he's moving through our sector in the next 72 hours. There's a high-value meeting in a nearby village, likely Taliban leadership. The Ghost will almost certainly be providing overwatch. We need volunteers for a tracking mission, deep territory, multiple days, high risk." Silence. Everyone knew what high risk meant here. Then Maya spoke. "I volunteer." The room shifted, not in approval, but in disbelief. Tank's laugh broke the tension. "That's rich. Send Tinkerbell after the Ghost, hell? Maybe she can wave." Her magic wanded him. The laughter was uneasy this time. They'd all seen her put Williams on the ground, but this wasn't a sparring match. This was hunting one of the most dangerous snipers alive. Rodriguez looked at her with something halfway between irritation and caution. "This isn't supply duty, Chun. This is—" "I understand exactly what it is, sir," she said. He scanned her file. "Your record says logistics and support. When exactly did you get experience hunting snipers?" She met his gaze without blinking. "I'm a fast learner," Tank snorted. "This guy has killed special forces operators. When the shooting starts, she's gonna freeze." She turned to him. "What happens when your size and noise discipline get your entire team killed before you even find him?" It landed. Tank's face flushed. Rodriguez cut in. "Enough, Chun. You're in, as a spotter. You'll be paired with Sergeant Morrison for the duration." Tank looked like he'd been ordered to carry a live grenade. Maya simply said, "Understood." They moved out less than 48 hours later. The Afghan mountains swallowed sound, the wind carrying only the crunch of boots over the narrow goat path. Maya brought up the rear, moving so quietly that even Tank, against his own instincts, began to notice. They'd been tracking for 18 hours, following the route she'd identified in the briefing, a route the Ghost would likely take toward. His next hide, Williams was on point when they reached the edge of a village. Mud brick buildings clustered around a dry well. Deserted, too deserted. Something was wrong. Tank glassed the place with his binoculars, frowning. Where the hell is everyone? Maya eased up beside him. Binoculars, she said. He hesitated, then handed them over. She scanned the rooftops, the alleyways, the details most people overlooked. A door open at the wrong angle, prayer flags hanging perfectly still, and the biggest tell, no dogs. Afghan villages always had dogs. He's been here, she said. Tank frowned. How can you tell? See the roof on the central building? Third from the left, southeast corner, there's a pile of stones, a V-shape. Shooting rest, not there in last week's satellite photos. He squinted. I don't see it. That's because you're not looking for it. The unease spread. She could feel it in the air. This wasn't a waypoint. It was bait. They advanced anyway, moving with slow precision. The smell hit her first inside the central building. Metallic, heavy, blood. 3 bodies lay in the main room. 2 men, 1 woman. Locals, each with a single gunshot wound to the head, arranged for maximum impact on anyone entering. Above them, a message in English scrawled on the wall. Come find me, Tank muttered. Jesus Christ. Maya's gut went cold. We need to leave now. Why? Because this isn't just a message, it's a setup. He knew we'd come. The whisper of fabric on stone above them was all the warning she got. Contact. She shouted, slamming into Tank just as the first shot tore through the wall where his head had been. Mud brick exploded into dust. She rolled, came up with her rifle, and fired toward the rooftop. 3 quick shots. One of the figures dropped. Snipers. Multiple positions. Tank's voice was already on the radio, calling for reports. From her position, Maya found another shooter in the minaret. Wind and elevation making it a 300-meter challenge. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse became a metronome. 1 squeeze. The figure slumped forward. Tank stared at her like he'd just seen a ghost himself. Where the hell did that shot? Northwest ridge, movement 400 meters. That's him. Even at that distance, she could tell. The ghost moved with purpose, controlled. Dangerous. Predator recognizing predator. For 1 frozen second, their eyes met through scopes. He fired. She was faster. Her shot hit his shoulder, twisting him sideways, sending his rifle tumbling. She cycled the bolt and fired again. But he was gone, slipping behind cover like smoke. The battlefield went quiet. The others reported kills. The ghost men were down. But the ghost himself was still breathing. Tank looked at her, something like respect settling into his features. We're gonna have to talk about your service record. She didn't look up from her scope. Later, right now, we track him before he finds friends. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? The firefight was over, but the air still carried its taste. Burnt powder, dust, and something metallic that clung to the back of the throat. For 2 hours they searched, following the blood trail that snaked away from the village and up into the jagged highlands. Each crimson smear on stone pulled them forward, but the man they hunted had vanished like mist. By the time the Chinook roared in for extraction, the team was drained. Henderson limped with a shallow graze across his calf. Murphy's hand shook. From the adrenaline dump, Williams kept scanning the ridgeline even as they boarded, as if the ghost might appear for one last shot. Maya sat in the back, her rifle stripped open in her lap. Each piece was cleaned and inspected with a rhythm that felt almost meditative. The others kept glancing at her when they thought she wasn't looking. Something had shifted. Tank sat across from her, his massive frame hunched forward, elbows on knees. His eyes kept going back to the image of her in the minaret. Calm, precise, lethal. That hadn't been luck. That had been skill born from years, not months. He finally spoke over the thrum of the rotors. Chun. That shooting back there. He trailed off, searching for the right words. Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that? Practice, she said, without looking up from the bolt assembly. Williams leaned in, his bruised face still puffy from their earlier lesson. "Practice my ass. I've been shooting since I was 12, and I couldn't make those shots. On my best day, that was something else. I had good instructors." Tank frowned. "Your file says logistics and support. Where the hell did you find time for good instructors?" For a moment, she considered telling them, just saying it out loud. But operational security wasn't a suggestion. It was the spine of her existence. Break it, and it wasn't just her own life at risk. "I spent time on the range whenever I could," she said instead. Rodriguez, who'd been monitoring the radio, pulled off his headset. "Chun, I've seen range shooters, and I've seen competition marksmen. What you did wasn't either of those. That was combat precision under fire. You move like someone who's done this before." Her eyes met his. "Done what before?" "Killed people," Rodriguez said flatly. "You didn't hesitate. Didn't flinch, no stress reactions. You moved like a veteran." The inside of the helicopter went still. The rhythmic thump of the rotors seemed louder now. Every man on that bird was watching her, waiting for an answer she couldn't give. "Sometimes people surprise you," she said finally. Tank shook his head. "No, I've been in the Army 12 years. I know the difference between beginner's luck and professional competence. What I saw was professional competence." Henderson spoke up from the rear. "Spotting the shooting rest, knowing it was a trap, calling sniper positions. That's not something you learn from books." Maya slid the clean bolt back into her rifle. "I observe, I pay attention to details," Williams scoffed. "Details? I was looking at the same damn village and didn't see any of it." "Maybe you weren't looking hard enough," she said, her voice level but edged. He flushed. "Or maybe you've got experience you're not talking about." She set the rifle down and looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of calm that felt more dangerous. "Maybe you should focus on your own story and let me worry about mine." Tank leaned back, the pieces starting to fall into place in his mind. Her constant scanning on day one, the way she'd mapped the base without seeming to, the hand-to-hand lesson she'd given Williams, now the kind of marksmanship that didn't just happen. "You're not who you say you are," he said finally. She held his gaze, something calculating flickering in her eyes. "I'm exactly who I say I am. Staff Sergeant Maya Chun, assigned to Forward Operating Base Blackwater for logistics support." "Bullshit," Rodriguez muttered. "Logistics personnel don't move like you move today. They don't shoot like you shot, and they sure as hell don't read a battlefield like that." Her voice changed then, not louder, but different. The tone of someone who'd been in command before, who'd given orders in places where disobedience meant death. "What you saw was a soldier doing her job under fire. Nothing more, nothing less." "And what job is that exactly?" Tank asked. "The same as everyone else on this base. Keeping coalition forces alive and completing the mission." It wasn't really an answer, but the way she said it shut down further questions. The men exchanged silent looks, the kind soldiers use when they recognize they've hit a wall. The helicopter began its descent, the base rising up through the dust below. Maya was the first one off, her gear shouldered, stride steady toward the debriefing area. "Chun," Tank called. After her, she stopped, turned. "Whatever your story is, what you did today saved our lives. We won't forget that." She nodded once, then walked on. By the time they reached the compound, the rumors were already spreading, not just about the firefight, but about the quiet support clerk who had dropped 3 enemy combatants with impossible shots. Curiosity replaced mockery in the eyes that followed her across the yard. In the debriefing room, Captain Rodriguez sat across from her, her service file open on the table. He tapped it with a pen. "Expert marksmanship scores from basic," he said. "Nothing that explains today. All your assignments are rear echelon. Support, so help me understand. How does a supply clerk develop the tactical awareness to read an ambush site and the skills to make those shots?" Before she could speak, the door swung open. Colonel Harrison strode in like a storm front. "Captain, I need to speak with Staff Sergeant Chun immediately." "With respect, sir. We're in the middle of the debriefing is over." Harrison cut in. His eyes locked on hers, and she saw it instantly. Recognition. "Staff Sergeant, you're coming with me." Rodriguez rose from his chair. "Sir, I have a right to know what kind of soldier I'm commanding." Harrison stopped at the door and turned back. "Captain, what clearance do you hold?" "Secret, sir." "Then you don't have the clearance to know what kind of soldier you're commanding." The words dropped like a stone in the room. She followed Harrison out into the sunlight. Soldiers stopped mid-conversation to watch them pass, whispers chasing in their wake. By the time they reached the command bunker, there was a small crowd lingering near the main briefing room. Inside, Harrison secured the door and moved to a terminal, entering a sequence of codes before pulling a thick manila folder from a safe. The classification stamps alone were enough to make Rodriguez's secret clearance look like a library card. He began reading. "Staff Sergeant Maya Chun, call. Sign, Reaper 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion, Special Operations, 2 tours Afghanistan, 1 Iraq with JSOC, graduated top of class at U.S. Army Sniper School, Fort Benning, advanced urban warfare with British SAS, counter-sniper certification, FBI hostage rescue team." He looked up. Combat record. Operation Enduring Freedom, 43 confirmed kills. Operation Iraqi Freedom, 28. Operation Inherent Resolve, 18. 12 of those were high-value targets. He paused. 89 confirmed kills in total. Maya's voice was calm when she spoke. "That was before today, sir." The room outside had gone still. The crowd pressed close enough to hear every word. Harrison closed the folder. "For the past 3 months, you've been under deep cover as a logistics specialist, gathering intelligence on the Ghost and his network. Today's engagement was not chance. It was the culmination of that operation." Her posture shifted then, the cover persona dropping like a shed skin. She stood straighter. The quiet clerk was gone. "The Ghost is wounded, but still operational," she said. "Request permission to finish the mission." "Granted, but your cover is blown. From this point forward, you operate under your true identity and rank." Harrison stepped to the door and swung it open. The soldiers outside stared at her. Men who had dismissed her, mocked her, bet money on her failure. Now their faces were a mix of awe, shame, and something close to fear. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, "meet Staff Sergeant Maya Chun, the Reaper, one of the most effective counter-snipers in the U.S. military. Today she eliminated 3 enemy combatants and saved your patrol team. I suggest you adjust your attitudes accordingly." She let her eyes sweep over them, not with gloating, but with the cool detachment of someone who didn't need their approval. "The mission continues," she said simply. "The Ghost is still out there. Anyone who wants to help is welcome. Anyone who doesn't, stay out of my way." Why did respect feel more dangerous than ridicule? The mess hall that evening was quieter than usual. Not the normal wind down after a long day, but a heavy kind of quiet, like the base itself was holding its breath. Conversation stayed in. Low murmurs, the scrape of cutlery muted against metal trays. Maya sat alone in a corner, her rifle laid out in neat, stripped pieces beside an untouched MRE. Cleaning it was second nature. The methodical motions of cloth and oil as automatic as breathing. Her posture was the same as it had always been, composed, deliberate. But the way people looked at her had changed. 3 days ago, they'd laughed at her size. Now, they stared with a mix of curiosity, shame, and a subtle wariness reserved for dangerous animals. Tank sat 3 tables away, his food untouched. He was staring into the middle distance, jaw working like a man chewing on something bitter. He'd started the betting pool about how fast she'd fold. Now he couldn't look her way for more than a second without his expression tightening. It was Williams who cracked first. He approached slowly, as if unsure whether getting close was smart. His face still carried the fading bruises from their first warm-up, but those marks meant something different now. The men had all realized it. She hadn't fought him to her limit that day. She'd been holding back. Sergeant Chun, Williams said quietly. She didn't look up from the bolt carrier in her hands. Private, I wanted to say thank you for having our backs out there, for saving our lives. She gave a single nod. You're welcome, he lingered, clearly wanting to say more, but unable to find the words. Finally, he added, I'm sorry, and walked away. The apology hung in the air. She could feel eyes on her. Soldiers who'd been pretending not to watch now, openly studying the exchange. Rodriguez was next. He approached carrying his tray, pausing a step from the table like a man waiting. For clearance, mind if I sit? She gestured to the chair. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble, assigning you to inventory duty while we took the real work. That was on me. You were following the cover story, she said evenly. That was the point, maybe, but I treated you like you didn't belong here. You treated me like a logistics soldier with no combat experience. That was what the mission required. He studied her for a long moment, searching for some hint of resentment. How do you do it? Let people treat you like that for months? Because the mission is more important than my ego, she said. The Ghost has killed 23 coalition soldiers. Every day he's still operational. More people die. If swallowing some mockery was the price of stopping him, it was. Worth it. The simplicity of her answer made him look almost ashamed. This wasn't about pride for her. It never had been. Henderson and Murphy came next, standing rather than sitting. Sergeant, Henderson said formally. Thank you for the overwatch today. You saved our asses when we were pinned down. That's what teammates do, she replied. The word teammates hit harder than any medal. Despite the way they treated her, she still included them. In that category, Murphy cleared his throat. If you need volunteers for the final phase, I'm in. I'll keep that in mind, she said. When they left, Tank finally rose. His usual swagger was gone, replaced with something heavier. He stopped beside her table, standing awkwardly. Chun, he caught himself. Sergeant. Chun, I need to say something. She set her cleaning cloth down, giving him her full attention. I've been in the Army 12 years. Thought I knew what a good soldier looked like. I was wrong. The things I said. There's no excuse. You're a better soldier than I'll ever be, and I should have recognized it from the start. You saw what you expected to see. Sergeant, most people do. That's not good enough, he said. A good NCO recognizes talent, no matter the package. I failed at that. You adapted when the situation required it, she replied. That's what matters. He nodded, swallowing whatever else he'd been about to say. If you'll have me, I'd like to volunteer for the final phase. I'll consider it, she said. When he walked away, the mess hall felt different. The space they gave her now wasn't born from dismissal. It was the kind of distance soldiers give to someone they respect, and someone they're a little afraid of. Colonel Harrison appeared not long after, carrying a cup of coffee and a folder marked with enough classification stamps to make even seasoned operators glance twice. Mind if I join you, Sergeant? She gestured to the chair. He set the folder down, flipping it open to reveal satellite photos and field reports. We've located the Ghost's probable position. Cave complex, 15 kilometers northeast. Heat signatures, blood traces likely. Treating his wound, she studied the images. They'll be expecting pursuit. Approaches covered. Escape routes planned. That's why we're not going after him. She looked up. The Ghost has a source inside this base, Harrison sighed. Someone feeding him convoy schedules, patrol routes, troop movements? We're going to feed that source false information. A decoy mission. High-value convoy through a valley tomorrow. He'll position himself for the hit. You'll be there waiting. She considered the plan, mentally tracing wind patterns, firing positions. Possible choke points. It's risky. If he suspects, then we've learned something about his intel network, but I think he'll bite. You wounded his pride as well as his body. He'll want revenge. That desire will cloud his judgment. I'll need a small team, she said. People who'll follow orders without hesitation. You'll have your pick, Harrison replied. After today, you'll have more volunteers than you know what to do with. He closed the folder and rose. We'll brief at 0500. Get some rest, Sergeant. She stayed at the table after. He left, staring at the satellite images. The hunt had shifted. The ghost knew she was coming for him, but now he'd be the one walking into her sights. For the first time since stepping off that helicopter, Maya felt the quiet inside herself. Again, not the quiet of being ignored, the quiet before a kill. Why did choosing the right people feel heavier than carrying the rifle? The briefing room was dim in the early hours, lit by a single overhead lamp that cast shadows across the map table. Colonel Harrison stood at one end, arms folded, his presence steady but sharp. Maya stood at the other, scanning the assembled faces. They weren't all familiar, at least not in the way she trusted familiarity. What she needed wasn't popularity or experience on paper. She needed control, quiet discipline, and the kind of nerves that didn't crack when the first round hit close. Her eyes passed over the volunteers. Tank stood in the front row, posture squared. Williams was there too, his bruises long since faded, but the lessons still visible in his bearing. Henderson and Murphy waited in silence, hands clasped behind their backs. A handful of other operators from different units filled out the rest of the room. This isn't a patrol, she began, her voice even but carrying weight. It's an interception. We'll be stationary for hours, maybe longer. There will be no room for errors, no second chances. The ghost has killed more soldiers than anyone in this theater. He will be watching for the smallest mistake. She let the words hang before continuing. I'm selecting 4 people. If you're not called, you stand down without question. This isn't personal. It's survival. She turned first to Tank. You're in. You move quiet for your size, and I need your spotting skills. Tank gave a short nod. Not the cocky grin she'd seen before, but something steadier. Henderson, your eyes are sharp, and you can hold a position without shifting for hours. You're in. Yes, Sergeant, Henderson replied. She studied Williams for a long moment. The others in the room probably thought he was out, but there was a stubbornness in him she'd come to respect. Williams, you're in. You've got something to prove. But more importantly, you listen when it counts. Williams looked almost stunned, then nodded firmly. Her final choice wasn't from her own unit. Corporal Diaz, she said, pointing to a wiry Marine in the back. I've seen your reports. You've tracked insurgents through worse terrain than this. You're in. The rest were dismissed without fanfare. The chosen 5 gathered around the table as Harrison outlined the operation. Convoy departs at 0900, he said, tapping the route. We've already leaked the schedule through the compromised channel. Our UAVs will maintain wide orbit, high enough not to spook him. Sergeant Chun's team will move into position before dawn. Estimated engagement window, 30 seconds to 3 minutes. The ghost won't linger once he takes the shot. Extraction? Tank asked. Harrison pointed to a secondary route. Ridgeline here. Chinook on standby. If things go loud, get to the pickup point. If not, exfiltrate on foot and we'll rendezvous at phase line Delta. Maya leaned over the map, memorizing every contour. Wind? Predicted crosswind at 7 knots from the west, Harrison said. She filed it away without writing it down. The team moved out under a moonless sky. The desert was cold enough to bite. Each breath visible in faint silver clouds, they moved. In single file, footfalls muted, rifles cradled against their chests. By the time the horizon lightened to a pale gray, they had reached the ridgeline overlooking the kill zone. A narrow valley flanked by steep, rock-strewn slopes. The convoy would pass below, boxed in on all sides. It was perfect sniper territory. And today, that fact would work both ways. They set up positions with silent efficiency. Tank took the western flank, his spotting scope sweeping the upper ridges. Henderson covered the far end of the valley. Williams positioned himself as a secondary shooter, angled to cover any escape routes. Diaz disappeared into the rocks on the eastern slope, his camouflage blending into the terrain until even Maya had to look twice to find him again. Maya herself lay prone behind a cluster of jagged boulders, her rifle resting on a bipod, scope glinting faintly in the thin morning light. She adjusted her position by millimeters until her cheek welled and breathing aligned with the reticles. Rise and fall. Time slowed in the way it always did before a shot. Through the scope, she studied the valley's shadows. The edges where rock met sky, a bird shifted on an outcrop. Wings rustling, farther out, a sliver of light flashed, too clean to be natural. Tank, she murmured into the radio. 10 o'clock, upper ridge, 200 meters past the outcrop, possible optics. Tank's voice came back low. Got it. Could be glass, could be a scope. She kept watching. A hand appeared briefly, adjusting something. He's here, she said softly. The convoy appeared at the valley's mouth minutes later. 3 vehicles, their engines low and steady. The sound echoed oddly against the cliffs. Dust trailed behind them in thin ribbons. The figure on the ridge shifted again. This time, there was no doubt. The ghost rifle was already in position, the long barrel steady as he tracked the lead vehicle. Wait, Maya whispered. He'll fire in 3, 2. The first shot cracked, the sound snapping against the valley walls. The lead vehicle's windshield spiderwebbed instantly. Her own shot broke almost on instinct. Through the scope, she saw the impact, a precise hit to the ghost's rifle. Shattering the scope housing, he jerked back, momentarily blinded. Move, she ordered. Tank and Henderson opened fire to pin him. Rounds sparking against the ridge. Diaz shifted position, cutting off the eastern escape. The ghost recovered faster than she expected. Instead of retreating up the slope, he dropped low and vanished into a crevice in the rocks. He's going down, Williams called. Negative, Maya snapped. He's repositioning. Watch your sectors. They waited, tension stretching thin. Then, movement on the western edge. Not the ghost, but a decoy, a scrap of cloth tied to a stick, bobbing in the wind. Smart, Tank muttered. Maya ignored the distraction, scanning lower. There, a glint in the shadow of a rock shelf. The angle was wrong for sunlight. Her breath slowed. The reticle settled. The ghost emerged just enough to take his shot. Not at the convoy now, but at her position. She squeezed the trigger. The round struck just under his collarbone, the force spinning him sideways. He stumbled, rifle slipping from his grip. Target hit. Tank shouted, but even wounded, the ghost didn't collapse. He dropped into the shadows again, moving with the stubborn will of someone who refused to die on another's terms. Diaz, cut him off, she ordered. On it, Diaz's voice crackled. Back. The valley went still except for the convoy engines fading into the distance. Somewhere in the rocks, a wounded man bled and moved like a shadow. Maya adjusted her scope, scanning every possible exit. This wasn't over, not yet. Why did the silence feel like it was watching her? The valley was still, but it wasn't empty. Every grain of dust, every rock shadow, seemed to hold the memory of the ghost's last position. Somewhere in that maze of jagged stone, he was bleeding, thinking, moving, and if she knew anything about him, he wasn't running blind. He was choosing the ground for their next exchange. Tank, eyes west, she murmured into the radio. Diaz, hold east choke. Henderson, keep your scope on that central ridge gap. Williams with me. The two of them moved low, weaving through boulders that jutted like broken teeth from the earth. Maya's boots found quiet footing on the sandy patches between stone. She didn't speak except to give hand signals. A halt here, a shift left there. Every so often, a faint noise teased the air. The scrape of boot rubber, the rattle of a small rock, but each time they closed in. The sound dissolved into the valley's natural echoes. Her mind stayed split, half on the hunt, half cataloging the ghost's probable thought process. He'd been hit under the collarbone, enough to weaken him, maybe slow him, but not immediately fatal. Pain would sharpen his survival instinct, but it could also make him reckless. They rounded a tall slab of rock and froze. In the dust ahead lay a strip of cloth, faded, sweat-stained, torn from a sleeve. Next to it, a smear of dark red. The blood trail led deeper into a narrow cleft between two ridges. William's breathing picked up. Maya crouched and studied the ground. Fresh. He came through here less than 2 minutes ago. William shifted his rifle. We go in? She didn't answer right away. Narrow spaces were a sniper's nightmare. No range. Limited sight lines. Nowhere to move if the other shooter had a sidearm or claymore. But leaving him to vanish into the terrain wasn't an option. She nodded. Once, we go. The cleft closed in quickly, walls rising above them. Light filtered down in thin shafts. She advanced slowly, muzzle leading. Every muscle primed for a snapshot. Halfway in, the world exploded. A shot rang out from ahead, striking the rock inches from her head. Chips of stone bit her cheek. She dropped and rolled. Scanning for the muzzle flash, Williams returned fire. The report of his rifle deafening in the confined space. Left wall. He shouted. She caught the movement. A shadow slipping behind a boulder. Too far to rush. Too close for a clean scope shot. Suppress. She ordered Williams lay down fire while she moved, keeping low, boots finding holds in the uneven rock. The moment she reached the boulder, she swung around. Rifle up, finger ready, empty. Only a smear of blood on the stone. Leading upward, the ghost had climbed, using the natural ledges to escape to higher ground. Williams, he's going vertical. She called. They scrambled after him, lungs burning in the thin air at the top. The terrain opened onto a jagged plateau littered with sharp stones and twisted brush. Maya dropped to a knee, scanning. The ghost stood 20 meters ahead, rifle gone, sidearm in hand. His left arm hung stiff against his body, the blood darkening his shirt, but his eyes, cold, calculating, were fixed on her. You were the one in the tower, he said in accented English. His voice was rough, as if unused to speaking mid-fight. You took the others, but you're not like them. She didn't answer. Talking was a distraction. You waited, he continued. Didn't take the first shot. You study before you kill. That's why you're dangerous. Drop the weapon, she said evenly. Instead, he smiled, faint, bitter. You've been hunting me, but you don't know who I was before this. You think I'm a ghost because you only know the body count. I know enough, she replied. Do you? His gaze sharpened. I was like you once, believed in something, until I learned the orders I followed were built on lies. William shifted behind her. He's stalling. No, Maya said quietly, eyes still on the ghost. He's trying to make me hesitate. The ghost's smile widened. And are you? She didn't answer. He raised the pistol, but not at her. His aim shifted toward Williams. Her shot broke before she registered the decision. The round took him high in the chest. He staggered, dropped the pistol, fell to one knee. Still, he didn't collapse. He looked up at her, blood on his lips, and said, almost gently, You'll understand one day. Then he fell, the dust swallowing the last of his breath. For a long moment, the plateau was silent except for the wind. Williams exhaled hard. That's it then. Ghost is down. Maya lowered her rifle slowly. Her heartbeat was steady. But there was a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with exertion. She'd hunted men before, but the way he'd looked at her, like he recognized something of himself in her, lodged in her mind. She moved to confirm the kill. retrieving his sidearm and searching his gear, maps, a small encrypted radio, and a worn photograph of a young woman holding a child. She studied it a moment before tucking it into her pocket. "Let's move," she said. The exfiltration was slow. Tank's voice crackled over the radio when they reappeared on the ridge. "Contact report?" "Target neutralized," she replied. "Prep for pickup." When they reached the extraction point, the Chinook's blades were already chopping the air. The crew chief pulled them aboard, the smell of hydraulic fluid mixing with the dust of the valley still clinging to their gear. As they lifted off, the kill zone fell away beneath them, the valley shrinking into the wider desert. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes of the flight. The mission was over, but the weight of it settled on them in different ways. For Maya, it wasn't victory she felt. It was the quiet acknowledgement of an ending, and the uneasy truth that endings rarely felt clean. She stared out the open. Rampant the fading horizon, somewhere in the folds of that terrain, men like the ghost were still moving, still watching, still waiting for their moment. Why did returning to base feel more dangerous than the mission? The Chinook dropped them on the landing pad under a red-washed evening sky. The air was thick with heat and jet fuel, a kind of smell that clung to uniforms long after the wash. As soon as her boots hit the tarmac, Maya felt it, eyes on her from every direction. Some of it was curiosity. Some of it was the quiet calculation of people realizing they'd underestimated someone. But there was something else too, something. Colder. Colonel Harrison was waiting at the edge of the pad, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. "Debrief in 20 minutes, he said. "Sergeant Chun, with me." She followed him through the warren of corridors to a small, windowless office. The walls were bare except for a single clock and a faded map of the operational sector. Harrison closed the door and set the clipboard down. "Mission was a success," he said, not looking at her. "The ghost is confirmed. KIA intel recovered from his gear is already being processed." Maya nodded once. "And why do I hear hesitation in your voice?" Harrison's gaze lifted to hers. "Because I've been in this business long enough to know that success doesn't always mean we're safer. The ghost was a sniper, yes, but he was also connected. His death will make someone, somewhere, very interested in the person who pulled the trigger. Let them be interested," she said. "It's not that simple." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The ghost comes had encryption we haven't cracked yet. Could be orders. Could be names. If they identify you, retaliation is a matter of when, not if." Maya didn't flinch. "That's the job." Harrison studied her for a long moment. Most people who say that don't actually mean it. A knock interrupted them. A young intel officer entered, handed Harrison a sealed folder, and left without a word. He broke the seal and scanned. The top sheet, his jaw tightened. "Sergeant Chun, the ghost's last transmission was to an unknown station, and it contained your name." She let that settle in the air for a moment. "Then I guess I was right about him knowing I was coming." "That's not the part that concerns me," Harrison said. "The transmission also contained coordinates. Here, this base." A flicker of heat moved through her chest. "He had someone inside." "Exactly, which means this isn't over." He closed the folder. "From here on, your movement will be restricted to need-to-know missions only. No casual trips to the PX. No lingering in common areas, understood?" She gave a small nod, though she knew the walls were already closing in. When she finally emerged from the office, the mood in the common area shifted as soldiers noticed her. Conversations faltered. Some men and women straightened, as if standing, a little taller in her presence. Tank was leaning against a pillar, arms crossed. "Heard you nailed him. Team effort," she said. He shook his head. "Don't sell it short. The way Williams tells it, you called the shot before the guy even finished lining up his." Williams, standing nearby, shrugged. She did. It would have been easy to let the praise sit there, to bask in it, but instead, she felt a strange discomfort in her own skin. She'd built her cover on being invisible, underestimated. Now there was no hiding. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, cleaning her rifle by lamplight. Her hands moved through the familiar motions, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the ghost's last words. You'll understand one day. Understand what? That every shot had a consequence beyond the trigger pull? That somewhere in the web of missions and orders, both sides believed they were the one protecting something worth dying for? Her mind flashed to the worn photograph in her pocket. The woman and the child. She still hadn't handed it over to Intel. She wasn't sure she would. The next morning, Harrison called her to a secure conference room. The brass were there. This time, a full-bird colonel she'd never met. A civilian in a suit with the kind of stillness that screamed intelligence agency, and two senior NCOs. The colonel spoke first. Sergeant Chun, your operational record is unique, and after this mission, it's clear your skill set extends beyond your MOS. There's an interagency tasking coming down. Classified, limited personnel. The suited man leaned forward. We'd like you to consider a transfer. It's not a request in the traditional sense, but you'd have the option to decline. Maya studied him and disappear into a desk job somewhere under administrative reassignment. He smiled faintly. Something like that. What's the alternative? You'd be working missions where your anonymity is your greatest weapon. Deep cover operations, cross-theater flexibility. You'd never have to worry about proving yourself to anyone, because no one would know you existed. It was tempting. In a strange way, no more briefings where people sized her up and found her lacking. No more public battles to justify her place. But it also meant vanishing from the life she'd built here, from the few faces she'd come to trust. Give me 24 hours, she said. The suit nodded. You have 12 when they left. Harrison lingered. Whatever you choose, Chun. Make sure it's yours, not theirs. She left the conference room with her thoughts running in tight circles. Tank found her on the range later, testing wind calls with a standard M4. The rifle light enough to feel almost toy-like after her usual setup. You're leaving, aren't you? He asked without preamble. I haven't decided. Bull. He slung his own rifle over his shoulder. You're thinking about it because you're tired of fighting battles you shouldn't have to fight. I get it, but just remember, there's more than one way to disappear. Sometimes staying is the harder thing. She didn't answer. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint tang of dust and oil. She lined up another shot and squeezed. The round had set her mass at 200 meters without her even thinking about it. For a moment, she wondered if that was what scared people more. Not the fact that she could hit anything she aimed at, but the fact that she did it without effort. That night, she found herself staring at the photograph again. She didn't know the woman's name. She didn't know if the child was even still alive. But she knew the image wasn't meant for intel reports. It was meant for a pocket. A reminder of why someone kept fighting. And suddenly, she understood why the ghost had looked at her the way he did. What did it mean to walk away without really leaving? The base felt different in the early morning. The air was cool, the sky a pale wash of blue, and most of the soldiers were still asleep. Maya moved quietly, her boots crunching on the gravel. As she made her way to the armory, the decision had settled in her chest sometime during the night. Not like a lightning strike, but like water filling a vessel until there was no room for anything else. She wasn't going to disappear into someone else's program. She wasn't going to trade one shadow for another. She would stay exactly where she was, in the open enough to be underestimated, in the quiet enough to do her work without noise, inside. The armory. The clerk looked up in surprise when she walked in carrying a small, sealed envelope. She slid it across the counter. For Colonel Harrison, eyes only, yes, Sergeant. She signed out her usual rifle, checked the optics, and adjusted the sling until it felt like an extension of herself. It wasn't just a weapon. It was her anchor, The one thing in the military that didn't care about her size, her gender, or the whispers that still floated around the barracks. By the time she reached the range, the sun had just cleared the horizon. The light was soft, the kind that made the dust hang in the air like fine gold. She sat up, prone behind the bipod, and let her breathing find its rhythm. The target was 800 meters out. She took her time, watching the mirage in the scope, reading the slight bend of heat against the crosshairs. The shot broke clean, the sound rolling back a second later. Dead center, she didn't smile. It wasn't about satisfaction anymore. It was about knowing she could, every single time. Footsteps crunched behind her. "Thought I'd find you here," Harrison's voice said. She rolled onto her side, resting on one elbow. "You read it?" "I did." He crouched next to her, resting his forearms on his knees. "So you're staying?" "I am." He studied her face for a moment. "You realize you just turned down the kind of offer that doesn't come twice." "I realize, and I also realize I'd rather choose my own ground than have someone hand me a map." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a while, the quiet broken only by the occasional snap of wind against the range flags. "You'll be watched," Harrison said finally, "by the people who think you don't belong, and by the ones who think you're too dangerous to let out of their sight." "That won't change," Maya shrugged. "Let them watch. They'll get bored eventually." He gave her a long, considering look. "You remind me of someone I served with years ago." She had the same way of making people underestimate her until it was too late. "What happened to her?" "She made it home," he said simply. "Not all of us do." When he left, she stayed on the range, running through drills until the sun climbed high and the heat began to shimmer. Each shot was deliberate, unhurried, like a bead on a string. Later, in the mess hall, conversations paused as she walked in, but only for a heartbeat. A few soldiers nodded. Others looked away. Tank caught her eye from across the room and lifted his coffee in a silent toast. Williams gave her a quick, almost sheepish grin before returning to his tray. It wasn't approval exactly. It was something quieter, recognition maybe, that night. She sat on her bunk with the photograph in her hand. The woman and the child stared back at her, frozen in their moment. She still didn't know their story, and maybe she never would. But she understood something now. The image wasn't about the past. It was about carrying something forward, even when you were the last one left to carry it. She slipped the photograph into the lining of her rifle case, not as evidence, not as a trophy, just as a reminder that every person in the crosshairs has a life beyond the frame. Whether you know it or not, in the days that followed, the whispers didn't stop, but they softened, became background noise. She walked past them without slowing, without looking over her shoulder. On the range, in the field, in the long, still hours before a shot, she carried herself the same way she always had, steady, unremarkable to the untrained eye. Only those who'd been there, who'd seen the calm before her storm, understood the weight behind it. And in that way, she became something the base didn't quite know what to do with. Not a legend, not a ghost, just a presence you didn't notice until it was too late. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting orders or wearing the most medals. Sometimes, it's the one who never raises their voice, who listens more than they speak, who lets others underestimate them until the moment it matters. And when that moment comes, there's nothing to argue, no speech, no declaration, no need for applause. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.